All right, back with some more self-defense stories for you. We're going to start today in Houston, Texas, because Houston, Texas never fails when it comes to self-defense. Every time I do one of these, there's one from Houston. All right, so we got an adult female who was injured. That's our victim. And our suspect, who is a significant other male, either current or former. So let's see what's going on in Houston. Before any kids arrived at a daycare Monday morning in Southeast Houston, an employee and her ex-boyfriend exchanged gunfire in the parking lot of the business. The employee had arrived at the daycare, and when police say her ex-boyfriend showed up, the woman had previously told the owner of the daycare that he had been stalking her, but it's unknown if a restraining order or calls of domestic violence had been documented. The detective with the Houston Police Department said that the man confronted the woman about something before both of them started shooting at each other. Police say about 10 shots were fired, sending both to the hospital with wounds to the abdomen and chest. The woman is unstable and the suspect in critical condition. The suspect faces charges of aggravated assault of a family member, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and a felon in possession of a firearm. The sky scene over the scene at 7:20 a.m. The video shows the blood around the vehicle and the parking lot on the corner of Ricky and Martin Luther King. Well, that tells you all we need to know. She works on the corner of Martin Luther King. Okay, so the way this reads is kind of vague. It's hard to tell. I mean, they both shot at each other. It doesn't even say who shot first, maybe because neither of them is in a condition to really tell the story yet when this was written. But they both shot each other, and they both were hurt in the incident that was on the corner of Martin Luther King. And we all know that Martin Luther King roads, streets, buildings, anything named after him seem to be hot spots for people getting shot or killed. Okay, let's go to Cumberland, New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, where we have an adult victim unharmed and a suspect that was injured, and this looks like a home invasion. A New Cumberland resident shot someone who tried to break into their home Sunday evening. The break-in and shooting happened around 8:15 p.m. Police said the suspected burglar fled the scene and was found near 16th and Bridge Streets. They were taken into a hospital for treatment. No arrests have been announced, and the investigation is ongoing, but the burglar did not appear to be random. So someone tries to break into this guy's house, and he shot them, and they say it didn't appear to be random, so I don't know if that means he knew the guy or not, but one more home invader taken out. All right, let's go on to Bradenton, Florida, where we have our victim, 35-year-old Bruce Brooks, who was unharmed and arrested. And then we got a 31-year-old suspect. That was a male, and he was killed. Bruce, 35, was charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Okay. An arrest has been made in connection to a 31-year-old man found dead from 2 gunshot wounds Sunday morning in Bradenton. 31-year-old man died from 2 gunshot wounds Sunday morning. Officers say a little before 3:30 a.m. they were called to the 700 block of 11th Avenue East, where they found the victim. The 31-year-old was taken to the hospital, where he later died. After locating Bruce Brooks, who police wanted to interview, authorities say he and other witnesses say that 31-year-old was involved in a domestic argument outside the home that escalated into him yelling at neighbors. The 31-year-old reportedly then grabbed a machete, entered the yard of his neighbor, and approached Brooks, who was asleep in the home's carport. That's when Brooks woke up and saw the 31-year-old coming at him with the machete, and Brooks then shot the 31-year-old as a form of self-defense. Brooks, who has a prior felony conviction, initially left the scene but later contacted the police department. The 35-year-old was charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and the investigation is active. So this guy gets in a fight with his wife or girlfriend or something, and escalated to him getting into some kind of confrontation with his neighbors, but it doesn't sound like he got in a confrontation with the guy who he actually tried to attack with the machete. And that guy who was sleeping in his carport had a gun on him and fired at him. And I don't know what was this city? Bradenton, Florida. I don't know much about it. I should have looked up that city. Because if the guy's sleeping, well, he's sleeping outside, though, on his property, he's got a gun on him. There's probably a reason for that. Anyway, that guy got taken out as well. So let's go on to, we got an adult male victim who was unharmed, and our suspect, Eris Jordan Holmes, 31 years old, was killed. It's another home invasion. All right, and this one's in Phoenix, Arizona. A man is dead after reportedly breaking into a house in South Phoenix before being shot by the homeowner. The suspect who was killed has since been identified as 31-year-old Eris Jordan Holmes. Shortly before 8 a.m. Sunday, Phoenix police say someone called 911 to report that a man had broken into his house, and then he shot the alleged burglar. Officers arrived and found Holmes dead at the scene. Detectives are investigating what led to the shooting, but preliminary information suggests Holmes unlawfully entered the home before getting into a confrontation with a person who lives there. Police say the homeowner was initially taken into custody before being interviewed and released. Once complete, the investigation will be turned over to Maricopa County Attorney's Office for review. So, a home invader comes in and he gets shot by the homeowner and he ends up dying. And we're one less home invader on the streets of Phoenix. All right, New Orleans, Louisiana, we got an adult male victim who was injured, and an adult male 21-year-old Lindsey Singleton, he's our suspect, and he was also injured. So both these guys were injured. The confrontation occurred around 6:30 a.m. The man was sitting inside the vehicle when he noticed the two suspects, both with faces covered, pulling on the door handles of nearby vehicles. The pair was being followed by a black sport utility vehicle. One of the suspects was armed with a gun and walked over to the man's vehicle with the firearm towards the victim's vehicle. The suspect pulled on the man's door handle. The man was afraid for his life and shot the suspect. He then scrambled out of the vehicle and tried to escape. The other suspect began shooting at the man, hitting him in the leg. The man was taken to the hospital to be treated for injuries. His condition was not immediately available. The suspect, wounded by the man, arrived at the hospital a short time later in a private vehicle. The suspect was identified as 18-year-old Lindsey Singleton. Singleton's condition was not available either. Once released from the hospital, he will be arrested and booked for attempted burglary, aggravated assault with a firearm, and being a principal to the aggravated battery. So this is New Orleans, and this dude was sleeping in his car, or sitting in his car, when these guys, at 6:30 a.m., when these guys are going around trying to break into cars. So this is the only way that you're going to stop these guys, is if somebody on the street stops them, because the cops aren't going to be able to, they're not catching them in the act. And in New Orleans, I don't remember the number that they're down, police officers, but I think I did a story on it. I either did a story on it or I was going to a few months ago, because they were down. It was a significant number. It was like 30% or more of their force that they had lost, and that going forward, they had projected that they were going to be down like 50% of their force pre-2020. So New Orleans is, if you live in New Orleans and don't have a gun, you better get yourself down to the range, buy one, and start training, because New Orleans it's only going to get worse, and it's already bad, but it's only going to get worse there. All right, let's go to Amarillo, Texas, where we have a 25-year-old male victim who was unharmed. We got two suspects, 120 and 117, both injured and both arrested. Let's see what they did. Two people were injured after a man had a gun pointed at him while traveling on I-40, and he retaliated by shooting at them. The incident happened around 12:30 a.m. Friday. Officers were called to the 1600 block of South George. Police made contact with the 25-year-old victim at his location. The victim told officers he was driving west on I-40 and a silver vehicle pulled up beside him and started honking. The front passenger in the vehicle pointed a gun out the window at the victim. The victim attempted to slow down to get away from the suspects, but they also slowed down and continued pointing the gun at him. With the threat of immediate bodily injury, or death. The victim got his own weapon and fired at the suspects, hitting the front passenger and the driver. Wow. The victim pulled over and the suspects drove to a local hospital. A 20-year-old man was driving the silver vehicle and the 17-year-old front passenger were both admitted to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The victim was not injured. A passenger in the back seat, identified as 24-year-old Marcus Druby, was caught on security camera throwing the gun in a trash can. He's been arrested for tampering with evidence. Druby was booked at the detention center. Charges are pending against the other suspects following their release from the hospital. So this is actually pretty good shooting on this guy's part. The victim, he's on the freeway and he's got these guys pulling up next to him with a gun, pointing a gun at him. And he pulls out his own gun while he's driving and manages to shoot both the driver and the passenger. That's pretty good. And then that stopped that incident for them. So let's go on to San Antonio, Texas. Man, there seems like there's a lot of Texas today. We got a female victim who was unharmed, and this is another significant other, an adult male who was injured, domestic violence, home invasion. San Antonio police are investigating after a man was shot during an altercation on the city's west side. Shooting happened just before 1 a.m. at a home on the 100 block of San Martin Street, not far from both Rios Street and Ferris Park. According to police, a man and a woman had gotten into an argument and the man left, but then ultimately returned. That's when police say, as the man tried to enter the home, the woman says she pulled out a gun and shot him in the foot. The man fled and has not been found. The police say presently searching for the man and are on lookout in case he goes to the hospital with injuries. So this lady gets in an argument with her significant other, and he leaves and he comes back, and then she shoots him, assuming she feared for her life. Some of these stories, when you do these, I read them, and this is why I started doing these as one big group like this, because when you look at some of these stories, there's not a whole lot there. Like anything that's here, you'd have to kind of just, kind of make up part of it in your head to know what's even going on, because there's not enough here to know what's going on. Like, we don't know. She pulled out a gun and she shot him in the foot. He tried to enter the home. It doesn't say did he live there? Was it his house? Did she shoot him and she shouldn't have? You assume that the guy was the one that's wrong, because the way they're telling the story is the guy did something wrong, but you're not getting enough information to really, even know what's going on with some of these stories. So this is why I switched to doing them as a big group, because a lot of these little smaller stories that aren't really all that interesting, sometimes they're still nice to hear, but they're not necessarily interesting enough to do a whole video just on the one, because nobody's really going to want to watch a lot of them, because the stories just, they're sort of interesting. Okay, so this is the last one we have. This is Bluefield, West Virginia. We got a 19-year-old male victim who was injured, a 43-year-old male victim injured, and we have a suspect. His name is Javon Lowe, and he's 18 years old, and he was killed. So let's see what he did. According to Detective Kenneth Adams with the Bluefield Police Department, 18-year-old Javon Lowe died as a result of injuries following a shooting. Detective Adams said Lowe was in an ongoing argument with another man. Lowe drove to the house of the 19-year-old man who he had been arguing with and began shooting, striking him in the knee. A 43-year-old on the porch was also struck, according to Adams. The 43-year-old tried to get away from the gunfire, where they also sustained a head and spine injury. The 19-year-old returned gunfire and struck Lowe twice. Adams says Lowe drove away and crashed in a nearby garage after losing consciousness. Lowe was taken to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The 19-year-old was taken to the hospital. The 43-year-old was taken to a different hospital, both with non-life-threatening injuries. There are no immediate charges at this time. So this Lowe guy, he's in a fight with this guy, and he goes over to his house and starts arguing with them again. It's like some ongoing feud. And he just began shooting at the 19-year-old kid and shot the other guy on the porch. And when the 19-year-old fired back, he ended up striking the this low guy who provoked the whole thing, and he ended up dead. And, that's kind of how this stuff should end. It rarely ends that way. Usually the bad guy's the one or the aggressor is usually the one that comes out ahead or comes out at least alive in these things. But this time the guy that was the aggressor ended up being the one that got killed and not the people that he was coming after. So that's all I got for you today were those. And again, this is just a bonus one this week. Next week we'll be back on Wednesday with another one. If the criminal does not fear the police, a judge, or prison, he must be taught to fear his victims.